Imagine this: Sam Altman, the face of OpenAI, the visionary driving us toward an AI-powered future, comes out swinging. He writes a long post not to beg, but to reject the very idea of a government bailout. He says flat out, "We do not have or want government guarantees for OpenAI data centers." That's a bold claim, especially when you consider that OpenAI is planning to sink $1.4 trillion into its computing infrastructure over the next 8 years. So what's really going on? Is Altman freaking out because the government said no bailouts for you, or is this a savvy market discipline play? And what does this clash between OpenAI and Washington tell us about the future of AI, public infrastructure, and who bears the risk when things go wrong? In this video, we're diving deep. We'll unpack the controversy, analyze the stakes, and explore whether this is a principled stand or a strategic misdirection. Let's get into it. It all began when OpenAI's CFO, Sarah Friar, made a comment during a Wall Street Journal event. She suggested that the U.S. government could backstop OpenAI's infrastructure loans, meaning the government would guarantee those loans so that if OpenAI defaults, taxpayers could pick up the tab. That was a red flag for many. It triggered speculation. Is OpenAI angling for a federal bailout? The reaction was swift. David Sacks, the White House's AI and crypto czar, took to X, formerly Twitter, and put down the controversy. There will be no federal bailout for AI. The U.S. has at least 5 major frontier model companies. If one fails, others will take its place. Altman then responded with a long post on X. He clarified forcefully that OpenAI is not seeking government guarantees for its data centers. He argued that governments should not pick winners or losers, and that taxpayers shouldn't be on the hook for business decisions that go wrong. If you step back, this isn't just a PR move. It's a philosophical and economic statement about risk, capitalism, and how we fund strategic infrastructure. Why does this matter so much? First, scale. OpenAI's $1.4 trillion plan is not small change. That isn't just building a couple of servers. This is a full-blown build-out, data centers, advanced chips, and long-term commitments to compute. To fund that, Altman says they'll use a mix of equity, debt, and maybe even sell compute as a service, what he calls the AI cloud. Second, political risk. If OpenAI did lean on the government for guarantees, that raises big questions. Who picks who wins in this AI race? What happens if things go south? Who pays the bill? By rejecting guarantees, Altman is drawing a hard line. If we fail, we fail. The market will decide. Third, systemic risk. Altman acknowledges there is a scenario where the government should step in, but not as a bailout. Instead, he talks about catastrophic risk, like a large-scale AI misuse or cyber attack. In those cases, he sees a role for the government as an insurer of last resort, not as a financier of private loss. So this isn't just finance. This is a debate about how we manage risk at the frontier of technology. Do we socialize failure? Or do we let innovation take its hits but reward success? But there's more nuance here. Altman also called for public-purpose compute. He argued that governments should build their own national AI compute reserves, data centers owned by the state, used strategically, not to enrich private companies. This isn't just about denying bailouts. It's about shaping the role of the state in strategic infrastructure for AI. That idea gets to the heart of the debate. Who should build the foundational infrastructure for artificial intelligence? Private companies or public institutions? Altman seems to be saying, companies like OpenAI will build what they think is valuable for the market, but governments should build capacity for public purpose. And if governments do build it, they should own the upside. At the same time, Altman is pushing for a different kind of government help. He's not asking for loan guarantees for data centers, but he is calling for an expansion of tax credits, specifically via the U.S. CHIPS Act. He wants the Advanced Manufacturing Investment Credit, AMIC, to include not just semiconductor fabs, but AI server production, data centers, grid components, and other infrastructure. That's a subtle but very real demand. It's not bail me out, it's help build the ecosystem. He wants governments to invest in the underlying infrastructure, but in a way that spreads risk and benefits beyond just OpenAI now. The tension here is real. Altman is walking a tightrope. On one hand, leading a company with eye-watering infrastructure spending. On the other, publicly rejecting bailouts, arguing for market discipline, and insisting OpenAI should be allowed to fail. Is he genuinely rejecting state support, or is he playing rhetorical defense while quietly lobbying for the kind of industrial policy that ultimately benefits his ambitions? That's what we'll unpack next. What this means for the AI industry, for government policy, and for the future of innovation. So, now that we know how this controversy started, with the CFO talking about backstops and Altman firing off a detailed no bailout post, let's dig into the deeper dynamics at play. Why is this fight more than just a PR scuffle? What are the risks, the economic models, and the long-term implications? Here's what's really happening behind the scenes. First, where the tension comes from. The trigger was CFO, Sarah Fryer's comments at a Wall Street Journal event. She floated the idea of a U.S. government backstop for OpenAI's infrastructure loans, especially for financing chips. In simpler terms, she suggested the government could guarantee loans. So if OpenAI stumbles, taxpayers might be on the hook. That's a big ask. Almost immediately, Fryer walked back her statement. She clarified on LinkedIn that her use of the word backstop had muddied the point. But by then, the speculation machine had already kicked into high gear. That's when Altman stepped in, very publicly. In a long, carefully worded post on X, he pushed back hard. "We do not have or want government guarantees for OpenAI data centers," he declared. He argued that governments should not pick winners or losers, and that taxpayers shouldn't bail out companies for bad business decisions. To drive the point home, Altman added a very capitalist line. "If we screw up and can't fix it, we should fail. Other companies will continue on. The ecosystem and economy would be fine." In other words, Altman doesn't want OpenAI to become too big to fail. Second, let's unpack the numbers and the risk. OpenAI is planning something massive. Roughly $1.4 trillion in capital commitments over the next 8 years. That's infrastructure, data centers, compute, chips, everything at a scale that very few companies ever dream of. But here's the tension. OpenAI's current annualized revenue run rate is around $20 billion. That's big, but compared to trillion-dollar commitments, it's still a stretch. How do they plan to fund this? Altman says they will use a mix, more debt, equity, and serving compute capacity to others via what he calls an AI cloud. This means OpenAI isn't just building for itself. It wants to sell its surplus compute power to other companies, potentially competing with giant cloud providers. The reason the CFO floated the idea of a backstop makes sense from a financing perspective. If debt is guaranteed, banks will lend more easily and at better terms. That's how backstopped loans work. If lenders know someone else, in this case a government, will absorb the risk, they charge cheaper interest and lend more aggressively. Third, Altman's vision for a different role for government. Even while rejecting guarantees for OpenAI's own data centers, he's not dismissing government participation entirely. He actually suggests governments should build their own AI compute infrastructure, what he calls a strategic public-purpose compute reserve. In his view, if the state builds data centers, then the upside, the returns, should also flow to the public, not just private firms. This is a philosophical shift. Instead of socializing losses, i.e., taxpayer money bailing out a failed private company, Altman seems to be advocating for public capacity building, but with public ownership. If governments build their own data centers, they can use that compute for national security priorities, research, or public good missions. That way, risk stays with the public sector, but so does the benefit. But there's a cynical take, too. Is this all just optics? Some analysts and critics argue that by rejecting guarantees publicly, Altman is managing reputational risk, while behind the scenes, he's still lobbying aggressively for favorable industrial policy. Consider this. OpenAI has formally pushed for expanding the U.S. CHIPS Act tax credits, specifically the Advanced Manufacturing Investment Credit, or AMIC, to include AI data centers, server manufacturing, and power grid components. That's not a bailout, technically, but it could massively lower their capital costs. Tax credits don't require repayment like loans do, so this is a way to use government policy to subsidize the AI infrastructure build-out. In fact, Altman has said publicly that he's discussed loan guarantees, but only in the context of semiconductor fabs, not data centers. So the move isn't give me free money to build data centers, it's more help me expand the supply chain for chips and power infrastructure. And that is a more politically palatable ask, at least on paper. Another layer, political and economic risk. If OpenAI's bet on hyperscale compute goes wrong, if they overcommit on data centers, or AI demand slows, Altman's rejection of guarantees means the full financial risk stays with private investors. That's a bold stand. He's essentially saying, we want to be judged by market forces, not government rescue. David Sachs, a known AI policy figure, echoed this sentiment publicly, declaring, there will be no federal bailout for AI. That line isn't just ideological. It underscores a broader debate. Should the government prop up the next frontier of corporate infrastructure or let the market decide who survives? Now, what are the broader implications if Altman's bet succeeds or fails? 1. If it succeeds, OpenAI could become not just a powerful AI company, but also a major infrastructure provider. Its AI cloud could rival traditional cloud giants. This could reshape the compute landscape, making AI infrastructure more competitive, decentralized, and potentially cheaper. Government-built compute reserves could also emerge, giving states their own strategic capacity. Second, if it fails, without guarantees, OpenAI could absorb massive losses. Investors could be burned. But Altman argues that the failure of one company wouldn't collapse the AI ecosystem. Others will carry on, and the broader AI market isn't dependent on any single player. That's the risk he seems willing to take. 3. For industrial policy, this debate could force a reckoning about how governments support cutting-edge tech infrastructure. Do we treat AI data centers like roads and bridges, strategic national infrastructure, or just as private business projects? Altman's framing could influence future policy decisions. 4th. For taxpayers, by rejecting guarantees but asking for tax credits and encouraging public compute infrastructure, OpenAI is reshaping how risk and reward are allocated. Taxpayers don't subsidize their failure, but they might help build the plumbing if they buy into Altman's vision. So, is Sam Altman really freaking out because the government said no? Not exactly. More likely, he's playing a calculated game. He's drawing a line, no taxpayer-funded bailouts, but he's not abandoning the role of public policy entirely. He wants targeted support, not to protect OpenAI from failure, but to build a robust, long-term AI ecosystem. He's demanding market discipline, but also industrial policy. That's a tricky balance. And through it all, the message is clear. Altman doesn't want to be cushioned by the state. He wants to win or lose on his own terms. Now let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. This isn't just a story about OpenAI, Sam Altman, or a government no. It's a glimpse into how the future of AI, finance, and public policy will collide. First, the lesson on risk and responsibility. By rejecting government guarantees, Altman is essentially saying innovation comes with consequences. If you build at the frontier of technology, you take the hits if it fails, and you reap the rewards if it succeeds. That's how capitalism is supposed to work. But it's rare at this scale. A $1.4 trillion bet on compute infrastructure is unlike anything most investors or policymakers have seen. The stakes are astronomical. And so is the tension. Altman's move also forces governments and the public to think carefully about where to put their bets. He's not asking for a blank check. Instead, he's pushing for policies like expanded tax credits and public-purpose compute. This is subtle but powerful. He's saying governments should build the foundation, not cushion private mistakes. That reframes the debate about public investment in high-tech infrastructure. Second, The implications for the AI ecosystem. Altman is banking on market discipline to separate the winners from the losers. This could lead to a more resilient industry in the long term. Companies that overextend and fail will exit, while those that innovate efficiently will thrive. In essence, he's letting natural selection in the AI market do its work. But there's a flip side. If OpenAI stumbles without a bailout, the ripple effects could be significant. Banks, suppliers, and investors all bear some risk, yet Altman is counting on the diversity of the AI market. Multiple frontier companies exist, and the ecosystem is larger than any single player. This is a calculated gamble, not panic. Third, this episode highlights how tech leaders are redefining the role of government. Altman's approach blends ideology with pragmatism. He wants the state involved, but only in ways that benefit the public broadly: public purpose compute, tax credits, and industrial policy support. All of these help build strategic infrastructure without socializing failure. It's a new model for the 21st century innovation economy. For policymakers, this is a wake-up call. They need to ask, should AI data centers be treated like roads and bridges? Should strategic infrastructure be publicly owned, privately managed, or some hybrid? Altman's stance pushes that debate into the spotlight. Finally, the human lesson. Altman's public messaging shows the importance of perception and narrative in high-stakes finance. One offhand comment from a CFO sparked speculation of a bailout request, but Altman turned it into an opportunity to clarify strategy, signal principles, and set expectations for investors and the public. Managing perception is almost as important as managing capital in these high-stakes environments. So, what can we take away from this saga? 1. Market discipline still matters, even at the trillion-dollar scale. 2. Strategic infrastructure might require government involvement, but smart involvement, not blanket bailouts. 3. Leaders like Altman are redefining the rules of risk, reward, and responsibility in the AI era. 4. Public perception can shape policy and investment outcomes just as much as dollars do. In the end, this isn't just about Sam Altman or OpenAI. It's about how society, markets, and governments will navigate the age of AI. Who decides which risks are worth taking, who bears the cost of failure, and who reaps the rewards of success? If you found this breakdown insightful, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me, do you think OpenAI should have asked for a bailout, or is Altman right to trust the market? And don't forget to check out my other videos where we dive deep into the economics behind today's biggest tech stories. The AI revolution is just getting started, and understanding its financial pulse is more important than ever.